guys might have before I start. I'll give you a chance to ask questions about the final towards the end of lecture. But is there anything else? No?
How are you doing?
Okay, it's all right, I guess. It's the last day. I'm kind of sad.
Is it the last day?
Yeah, it's really the last day. It's really sad. I mean, of this class, not of everything. Yeah. So one announcement I should make. I had a long talk with the TAs. Well, they sort of had a long talk with me, I guess. And I've been convinced that what I should do for calculating the grade is to take the... You'll remember there's a formula, right? It says something like the assignments together are worth a third of your grade, roughly. The midterms together are, again, worth about a third. And the final, again, is worth about a third. There were 9 assignments. The TAs have convinced me that I should not take all 9 of those assignments. Instead, I should take your 8 best assignments and make that the... I don't know what you're paying the TAs, but it's working. It's really working. Okay. All right. Well, I've been talking a little bit about what we know or what we think goes on as children acquire some of the stuff that I've spent the semester teaching you. And the last little bit that we have to look at concerns what we know about how children have acquired some of the things you now know make up phonologies of languages. So like in particular, you'll remember that part of what you know about how to command English concerns which sounds make up morphemes, how those sounds turn into allophones. So there's certain rules that convert some of these sounds into close neighbors in certain places. And there are rules that tell you how to group these sounds into syllables. And those rules make reference to phonotactic constraints. Those constraints say what sorts of things can be in the beginnings, onsets, or ends, codas, of syllables. All of that you learned about English. All of this is stuff that is particular to a particular language, so it's something you must have learned. And we want to know how did that happen. Everything we know about this comes from looking at what children do as they acquire the phonology of a language. And, as I said a couple of days ago, what we do is we just stop a child on the street somewhere, and we write down the things they say, and we try and figure out what grammar they obey. And we compare that to the grammar of, well, say their parents, adults whose language they're trying to acquire. Okay? So I thought I would give you just a snapshot of what we see when we do that with kids. Okay? So here's a series of words transcribed from a guy named Michael when he was about 2 years old. Well, I guess 2.5. Right? And what I've done, it's just like we're looking at a new language, and we're going to try and figure out, well, what's going on. These are the words that Michael was trying to say, and this is how he says them. So this gives you a picture of how Michael thought these words should be pronounced. And Michael, it turns out, though a rather odd child in many ways, is perfectly normal with regard to his phonology. Michael is now your age and lives in Alaska. Okay? So here's some, I think, last I heard. Well, he stopped writing, Soap comes out soat. Kiss, tis. Stroller, polar. His name, Michael. Piggy, pity. Cow, tow. Crayon, payon. Poppy, potty. Always good for a laugh. Street, Pete. Apple, addle. Stick, tit. Another chuckle. Clean, teen. Glue comes out as do. Plain as pain. Big as bit. Train, pain again. Okay. Why? The question is, why does he say these words this way? I mean, presumably, his parents are saying this. Soap, kiss, stroller, Michael, and so on. Actually, I listened to their parents. They don't say things like tit for stick or tow for cow. They say cow for cow. Okay. So why does Michael think this is how these words should be pronounced. He spoke this way for just a few months, but he was perfectly consistent during those few months. This really is how he decided these words should be pronounced. Now, if you look at his words and compare them to the words that he's mimicking, if you like, or trying to learn, you'll notice there's some generalizations here. So for instance, no onset has two sounds in it. Cla, he won't do it. No way. Gla, he won't do it. Pla, no. Tra, no. Stra, no. Won't do it. Stra, no. Okay. His onsets are Japanese. One sound, no more than that. Okay. Very characteristic of 2-year-olds. Their onsets, no more than one consonant in them. Okay. Why is that? Well, maybe he has a different phonotactic constraint. Or maybe his mouth is just too small for his gigantor tongue. If you have looked at 2-year-olds too closely, you will know their tongues are outsized relative to their mouths. Yeah? So maybe it's just hard for him to throw all those consonants together. I mean, maybe what's happening to poor old Michael is he hears stroller and he thinks, shit! Okay? I can't do that. I'll do something else. And it's pa. That might be what's going on. It might just be he can't say some of this, and he does something else. Okay? So, here's some ways in which he decides perhaps not to say these complex onsets. So, stick, he just leaves out the sa, right? Right? So, delete sa. Okay? Right? Where else do we? I guess that's where we see it. Yeah. Right. And then tra, he just decides to always say this as pa. Okay. So train, no, I'll just use pa instead of tra. Get rid of the sa and you're left with treat. No, I'll just replace that tra with pa. Okay? Yeah.
Do you think that for words like stroller, before he came up with polar, he had tried other ones, but polar was the one that registered in the adults' ears as the most recognized?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So maybe he thought, oh, crap, I can't do that straw business. I know what, I'll get rid of the sa. Oh, crap, I'm still left with tra. I can't deal with that. So, I don't know, I'll just try other sounds. Maybe I'll try ma. No, they don't understand what I'm saying. Maybe I'll try pa. Oh, they seem to understand now. I'll stick with pa for a while. Yeah, it could have gone like that. I don't know. I don't know what he did before this. Yeah, that seems like he was a smart boy. Maybe that's what he did. Okay? Here's some other things he does. So, let's see. Plain. He deletes the la, right? So he just says the pa part. Plain comes out pain as a consequence, right? And, it's not that he can't say all. He says it here and here. It's only when it's in this onset with other consonants that he decides, well, one of these consonants has got to go and it's going to be all. Okay? So he's formed some strategies around saying onsets that are supposed to have more than one sound, but he's going to find some way of saying only one sound instead. Okay. And now there's something else that's going on. And again, in this respect, Michael is very much like other 2-year-olds. If you look through these words, you'll see he doesn't ever say ka or ga. And where the adults are saying ka or ga, he says ta or da instead. So, that's why cow comes out tau. That's why piggy comes out pity. That's why clean, get rid of the ul, what's left is ka, comes out ta, teen. Yeah? Gla, get rid of the o, you're left with ga, but no, don't say ga, say da instead. Okay. Ta and da sound a lot like ka and ga. So it might be, I'm not sure exactly what to think here. It might be that Michael just hasn't figured out that ta and da is different from ka and ga. A kind of generalization that emerges if you look at kids acquiring sounds is that those consonants that are made in the front of the mouth, like ta and da and pa are, seem to be in their vocabulary before those sounds that are made at the back of the mouth, like ka and ga are. Okay? And, one hypothesis is that this has something to do with being able to perceive correctly what you're hearing and figure out how that sound was made. Ta is so close to ka, maybe it's just hard to figure out what they did, those adults, in making that sound. And perhaps what they do is make a stab at it and make a mistake. Okay? Now, to show you, can we get the sound going here? Can we see that? Oh, that sounds like it might work. To show you how hard it is to tell ka from ga, I want to show you something. This is a little television program from Japan. The television program is illustrating a phenomenon called the McGurk effect, which is what I'm about to show you too. But I thought the crazy Japanese television show program would be more interesting. So what you're going to see here is this guy saying a bunch of sounds, and then you'll see a Japanese audience responding to this. Okay? Are you ready? You're not. I can see that. Okay. Shall we go? What did you hear? What was he saying? Not the Japanese dude. So did you hear da? Did you hear ga? Something like that? Okay. I have no idea what they're saying. It just goes by so. Watch now. What did you hear? That's what he said the first time too. Always ba. But what he's making with his mouth are the sounds da, ga, 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 ga. And superimposed over that is him saying ba, 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 ba. You don't hear ba because you're using your eyes to figure out what he's saying. And when you take away the visual input, suddenly you hear what he's saying. Do you understand? So if I were able to say ba, 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 ba by doing this, you'd hear da or something like that, even though I would be making ba, 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 ba. Perceiving sounds. What the apparatus you bring to the problem of figuring out, well, what sound is being made is more than just your ears. It's also your eyes. And so, it kind of stands to reason that if you're a child trying to figure out how these sounds are being made, the stuff you can see is going to be stuff you figure out first. So the sounds being made in the front of the face, you might acquire faster than those things that are being made in a place you can't see them. Yeah? The McGurk effect. Sorry? You want to listen to the front again? Okay. Okay, here we go. You know, I've looked and looked and looked for these sorts of tapes, and it's best if it's done with like a human. But all we have today is this Wookiee. And now... Shock! You know, I watch these tapes. I watch these tapes on YouTube thinking, oh, I want my class to be like this. It never happens. Okay? So that's one thing that seems to happen. Kids learn and use the sounds that are made in the front of the face before the sounds that are made behind. You know, maybe it has something to do with this perceptual effect that I just illustrated. The McGurk effect, it's called, after the psychologist who discovered it. And then finally, there's one last weirdo thing in Michael's grammar. And that's this. He doesn't always say pa. Okay? He certainly can say pa. Right? Because he's saying it, well, in all these places where he shouldn't. Pete, pain. But he doesn't always say pa. He won't say pa when it's in the middle of a word, like here. In the middle of a word, instead he says ta. Okay? Right? Where else does that happen? Maybe that's the only place here. Oh, here too. Apple becomes attle. Yeah. Okay. Pa at the beginning of the word, fine. Has no problem making pa. But pa in the middle of the word, no, those are becoming tas. All right? So the first difference we see in Michael's speech has something to do with onsets. If onsets have too many consonants in them, he does a variety of different things to make them just have one consonant. Maybe because he can't get his tiny little mouth to do anything else. Okay. The second difference we saw was, again, it might have something to do with Michael's just physiology in a way, or decisions about what he's hearing. So he's decided there aren't cuz and guz, those are all tus and does instead. And maybe that's just because he hasn't yet quite figured out what the hell is going on over there in his parents' mouths. But this is a completely different thing. This is something about a sound he can say that he's choosing to say a different way in a very specific place. So one thought that comes to mind about this is that, again, maybe it's like this tada for kaga stuff. Maybe he just isn't able quite to hear pause in the middle of words. Maybe for whatever reason, when they're surrounded by other sounds, these pause sound to him like ta, and he's just made a kind of mistake about what he's hearing. A mistake that he repeats. Right? So, I tested this. Well, the test goes like this. So, you sit with Michael, you play with him for a little while, and then you wait for his father to come in. And you say, oh, look, it's potty. Just what he would say. Right? Oh, look, it's potty. And you know what Michael did? No, it's potty. Yeah, that's what I said. No, you said potty. It's potty. He can hear the difference. He knew I said poop, not poppy. So what's going on? I think he's got a rule. He's decided ta is an allophone of pa. Ta is the way you say pa in the middle of a word. I don't know what else it could be. He can hear the difference. He can say those sounds. It's just he's made a decision that sometimes instead of pa, you say ta. Yeah.
When it's in the middle of the words, he requires him to fully close his mouth.
I'm sorry, when it's in the middle of a word?
He'd have to completely close his mouth again as opposed to T. It's not a complete closure.
Yeah, that's true. So the closure is different for sounds in the middle, for stops in the middle than at the beginning. But that difference is true for both ta and pa. So, like if we think about what makes pa different from ta, it isn't that, well, they're both voiceless stops. They both are the kinds of things, for instance, that get aspirated. Yeah, it may be that he's making still some kind of mistake about what he's hearing there. Or, something like that. But it looks to me like he's got a regular process that makes pa's ta's in a certain place. Sir?
I just think it's interesting because he can understand, he can hear your way of saying it's wrong.
Yeah.
And make the connection of what he says is wrong.
Yeah.
I can understand if he does something to make his speech change, and you should still be able to hear that, shouldn't he?
Yeah, but he doesn't. It's weird. It's just plain weird. Maybe, maybe that's why Michael's in Alaska now. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's very strange. Of course, you aren't able to, you aren't probably aware, or weren't maybe before you came into this class, that the way you say pa differs depending on where you say it in a word. Right? So he may be hearing something that I can't hear. The ta's that are really pa's versus the ta's that I'm making. Maybe his ears are just simply better than mine. So the ta that is the allophone of pa for Michael maybe is not the ta's that I'm using. It's some other ta, which I can't hear. Maybe something like... Ma'am?
That happens when people are learning different languages too.
Yeah.
It's like an SNL skit where someone's foreign and they're like, my name is Gleplik, and they're like, Gleplik? No. Gleplik.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Always push in.
Yeah, right. So it could be something like this. If you speak one language where distinctions are made, people who don't speak a language where those distinctions are made just aren't going to be able to hear what you're saying. And it's going to be hard to mimic them. So maybe that was my problem. I couldn't hear what Michael was saying properly. There was yeah.
Well, kind of a relevant question. Is this kind of rule of why little kids are so much better at learning foreign languages than adults?
Yeah. I think there's a few reasons why kids are so much better at learning languages than adults. One is that you'll remember last time when I talked about being able to hear different phonemes. Kids' ears are just better than ours. Yep, they're just plain better. Kids' minds are faster than ours. They learn and memorize things much faster than you do. They're better. They're superhumans, kids. So that's one problem. That's one difference. Another difference is that, if you watch people's abilities to learn a language, they're really, really good in the first 5 years, and then it starts getting kind of shaky. But they're still better than you guys until puberty. Ladies and gentlemen, sex is a bad thing. It makes you stupid. So I think that's the last reason. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, yeah. So here are the things I hope to illustrate about what children seem to be doing as they're acquiring phonologies. At least this is true of Michael, and I've tried to pick things out of Michael's speech that are sort of common things we see in children's speech as they're acquiring a phonology. Their syllables are very simple, no complex onsets really, or codas. They like sounds at the front of the mouth better than at the back for a while, and they do crazy shit. Just things we can't figure out. Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's the end. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to take a quick look at what I think you should do for the final, in preparing yourself for the final, okay? I'll post this slide on the web page, so don't worry about copying anything down. Let me make this an opportunity for you to ask me questions as I go through this. So I think in studying for the final, my advice to you would be the same advice I've given all along for studying with tests, and that is go back, look back over stuff you've done, okay? So there are lecture notes now for most of the material that's hard. There's lecture notes on phrase structure rules, there's lecture notes on syllables, there's lecture notes on everything. Just go and read those. They're not long, they're beautifully written, they're flush right, they're wonderful things. Read those, and then try and do the homework assignments again. Just download them. They're on the web page. Download them, do them. Do all of them. And then check your work against the answer key. There's only 9 of them. And then take those midterms out and take them again. Just take the midterms again. Give yourself an hour. Take the midterms again. You guys okay back there? Yeah. Had a little. Let me take a look at the guilty parties here. See if I can. Are you the two that were necking earlier in this class? Did this have anything to do with? No, this was just a fruit. Yeah, okay. All right. I test, as you know now, I test on talents, on abilities, not on facts. So in studying for this, what I think you should do is just make sure that you can do those skills I've tried to teach you in this class. So let's run through those. You should know the International Phonetic Alphabet. You should be able to read it, and you should also be able to take something like speech and transcribe it. You should be able to go both ways with the IPA. You should remember how syllables are built. So you should remember the little procedure that builds syllables. So you have a word. What you do is you find all the nuclei. Those are vowels generally. Then you look to the left of each nuclei, gather up onsets, gather up consonants into onsets. And when you're done with that, you gather up the ones that are after the nuclei and the codas. And this gathering up business is steered by phonotactic constraints. So you should know those as well. Yes, sir?
Is my understanding correct that you can not have onsets and codas, but you have, that's poorly phrased, but there cannot be.
Yeah, so let me answer a question that might be yours. A syllable doesn't need to have an onset, nor does a syllable need to have a coda. A syllable can be a single vowel. Is that your question? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Remember the phonotactic constraints. These two things I did not quiz you on in the second midterm, so I am worried that your skills here are rusty. There will be a question on this in the final. Let's look at those phonotactic constraints. I taught you about onsets. The biggest onsets in English have 3 sounds in them. The first is sa, the second is a voiceless stop, and the third, it depends on what the second is. It's la, ra, ya for pa. It's ya or ra, at least for some, if ta is the second, and it's wa, ya, la, ra, if ka is the second. Okay? We learned 3 constraints on codas. All of these constraints govern what happens when 2 consonants are in a coda. One of these says, if the first thing in a coda is minus voice, the second must be minus voice too. You can't have a coda that has 2 consonants, the first voiceless, the second voiced. The second constraint is very much like that one, but it goes in the other direction. It says, if the first sound in a coda is voiced, unless that sound is also sonorant, the second must be voiced too. If the first consonant is voiced, the second must be voiced too. unless the first sound is a sonorant, a sound like or or . And the third constraint we learned about codas is that if only one of two sounds in a coda is sonorant, that sound must be first. It can't be second. Okay. Know the phonological features. There's a handout that defines them. Know what they are. What's anterior? Was there an yes? Yeah, forward of the velum. What are coronal sounds? Made with the blade or tip of the tongue. Yeah. Okay. What are strident sounds? Know that. Go back, just learn that again. Know how to find allophones and phonemes. And know how to discover a rule that's responsible for making those allophones and write that rule in terms of features. Okay. There's a bunch of problems on the class website of this sort. Just sit down and do them. See if you can do that still. Okay. Memorize the bound morphemes of English, the prefixes and suffixes of English. There's a list on the slides from that lecture. Just memorize them. And what you should do there is remember what kinds of things do these affixes go on, verbs, nouns, adjectives, and what kinds of things do they make? What kinds of words do they make? And remember the right-hand head rule. The right-hand head rule says the category of a morpheme on the right-hand side of a word is the same as the category of the word that's being built. So that's a generalization that we can see by looking at words like these, for instance. Doable is made up of do plus this thing, able, which is an adjective, and that's why the whole thing is an adjective. Unhappy is made up of a prefix whose category we don't know, but the right-hand member is an adjective. Happy is an adjective, and so is unhappy. The right-hand head rule. Know how to use these rules to build up words from morphemes. So if I gave you a word like redoable, you should be able to tell me that re attaches to do to make the verb redo, and able attaches to that verb to make the adjective redoable. Okay? Finally, know the phrase structure rules of English. Know how to use them to parse a sentence. Know how to use them well enough to find more than one parse for a sentence, and know how to map those different parses, those different organizations of words into different meanings. Okay? I'll put the rules on the final, but know them, know how to use them. And finally, know the cleft rule. Know how it works. What does it take? What does it make? Sir?
When you say transcribe IPA, on the final, are we going to be, or you don't need to answer this, but will we need to know how to transcribe speech, or are you just looking for us to transcribe written things? I mean, are you going to speak something in like a funny accent?
Yeah. I'm going to speak something and you're going to transcribe it. Yeah. That's what's going to happen.
I have two questions. One, is it 1 hour or 2 hours long?
2 hours long. 1:30 to 2:30. And then again from 2:30 to 3:30. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
my second question is what you said you were going to have some rules on there. What else will you have on the exam?
The one thing I won't have on the exam are answers. Okay? What I will have is the feature chart, the phrase structure rules, and, ladies and gentlemen, hidden in the final will be a clue. Okay? Yeah. Sir?
With the relation to the stuff, so we're going to have to know all the coordinate constraints. And all
You don't have to know the constraints. I will never ask you about the coordinate structure constraint. Okay?
Will anything be as detailed as homeworks, or are they just kind of... Will it take up the 2 hours?
It will take up the 2 hours. Yeah. It will take up the 2 hours. Okay? Can can you get rid of this for me and put on the spots, please? Are there any other questions about the final? I will be in my office next week, Wednesday, 9 to 11 at the regular time. I have teaching evaluations. I realized I wouldn't really have enough time to give these to you. Could I ask you guys to hand these out? So you'll see that I filled them